Okay, thank you very much for being here, and we are part of panel 5 this afternoon, responsible consumption and production. I am Maxine McLean, chair of the session, and if we connect it to the issue of sustainable development goals, we're actually talking about goal 12, sustainable consumption and production. And if I could just briefly contextualize this particular panel and the Sustainable Development Goal 12, the global economic system we can probably describe as being under crisis. Among other things, we have been facing and will continue to face the consumption of natural resources at a level of increase beyond the capacity for developing alternatives or the regeneration of the resources that we have if we are not intent on developing strategies to address that. Of course, we've also seen other fluctuating commodity prices, fuel, for example. In response to those realities, of course, and one of the more scarce resources, of course, is water. I am from a country that has been described as water scarce by the use of the global standards. We probably achieve about 50% of what's considered the global standard for classifying countries as not being water scarce. What we want to do, of course, in the pursuit of sustainable consumption and production is to pursue efforts to alleviate global poverty and promote sustainable development. The question, of course, is how do we do that? By increasing efficient resource use, pursue economic growth without engaging in environmental degradation, while among other things creating decent jobs. You're not here to hear me in the first instance, or probably to hear me. And I really want to thank our presenter, Donna Kadu Jeffrey, an economist by profession, and we would have been provided with information on her credentials. Her credentials, and therefore we can discuss with her later her issues in economics and interest in economics. But immediately we are going to be given a presentation on managing water resources for sustainable development in the Caribbean, dynamic policy options. And of course, if you're thinking about the purpose of this conference, we are seeking solutions as we within CARICOM, as part of the global family, are trying to ensure that we have an agenda which is achievable, and to do that we have to put in place the necessary programs, structures, etc., in a manner that is inclusive, that is engaging of our populations, and therefore put in place all of those things that will make possible the achievement of the 2030 agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I believe that we are being treated to what I think is the essential of our existence. Without water, we can do nothing.
Thank you, Senator. Well, you've given more or less the introduction I would have given in terms of how important water is to us. And if you think about your day's procession from the time you would have gotten up to now, how useful water has been from morning up to now and probably going into the evening. It has formed part of your whole ecosystem, what you would have done, what you ate, drank, and whatnot. And so I will start with my caveat first of all. I am an economist. I am not a natural resource person or water expert in any way. So what we tried to do with this policy note was try to bring the issues forward in terms of water and what it means for us, the Caribbean region, and for individual countries when we think about development, and especially sustainable development. I will give you in a few words what the situation is. And in my opinion, we're facing a water crisis on the broad surface. Basically, we have a huge gap between what our expected production and supply will be by 2030 and beyond. Now, like I said, this study, what we did was to pull information from different sources. It's not very highly scientific on our end, but what we did was to pull from information sources, including a study from the CDB, which was done in 2015, the World Bank indicators, Aqueduct, and some other resources to bring the message out there that we are really facing a water crisis in the region. Notwithstanding what the senator said, we have an abundance of water, but can we really use the water that we're surrounded by? So with that, I will start the presentation. So I will start with the key issues and then go down the line, highlighting where the areas, what the information shows in terms of the problems. And what we did was to present some solutions, not scientific, but showing you what some of the countries within our own region have done and could probably give us some guidance as to how we proceed in our own settings. So the key issues that we highlight are water shortages or stress, and the senator would have said it. Actually, Barbados and a lot of countries are on the number 5 index of high stress, water stress countries. And I come from St. Lucia. I live in Barbados now, and I can tell you what the challenges are when it comes to water. You get some rain, and in no time your water supply is shut down, and the next time it comes back on, most likely in St. Lucia the water won't be usable in terms of drinking water because it will come out with some brown substance or whatnot. In any case, our second issue is a broad-based decline in water resources, and you will see that as I go down the slides that in less than a lifetime of one person, say 50-something odd years, that we've lost probably about 40% of our natural water resources, and that's usable water within the Caribbean region. The third one, which I think this is where we could have an input, is inefficiencies. And when I say inefficiencies, I mean inefficiencies in consumption, non-revenue water, very poor infrastructure, and management of water resources. And the fourth one, when we look at long-term planning, I think this is an area that we're lacking in terms of, we talk a lot about food security, but do we even talk about water security, which forms the basis of this food security that we speak of? And so the approaches that we're recommending, and like I said, these are really based on what has been done in the region. Integrated water resource management, and that has been done on a Caribbean level. There's an agency who would have supported some form of integrated water resource management, but I think there is a lot of scope to advance this process at a much faster pace. Tariff reform, reducing non-revenue water, and of course governance. So this I had put in here just as a factor, and for those of us who know that our freshwater resources worldwide is just about 3% of all the water that is available. And of that percent, what is available in freshwater is even smaller. So when I speak of the BMCs, I'm really speaking about, it's about 19 of the borrowing member countries of the CDB, but it makes up a large pool of the Caribbean territories. So from the data from the study from CDB in 2015, following on from my previous slide, we see that a lot of our water is actually surface water, groundwater. And of course, for some countries who have had issues with water, lack of water, we've had an increase in desalination as a source of water. And I would have mentioned this before, in less than somebody's lifetime, probably 50 or so years, that we've had a tremendous decline in freshwater resources, between 30 to 40%, depending on the territory. And this is significant, and we expect that this will continue in the medium to long term. Water coverage, from what the data showed, that we have good water coverage, but I think it depends on from what angle you're looking at water coverage. And quite apart from water coverage, the issue of quality becomes important. Like I said, there are times you open your tap and the water that comes out, you can't really use it. And even if you have taps at home, I was reading a story from Jamaica, I think last week, where persons were saying that they've not had water in these taps for more than 5 years. So access or coverage is really, it depends on the lens that you're looking at it from. And metering, of course, is also another issue. And that goes down to the governance and the management of water resources, as well as the financial aspect of it. How do you invest in the infrastructure that you need if you're not collecting the revenues that is required for that type of investment? And so, like I would have highlighted the challenges, but just to show you what the data shows, what are the challenges with respect to consumption. This graph will show you that our consumption in the region is way higher than what the world standard is. And we have the rural standard rural standard and urban standard, international standards, with your yellow, I think if you can see yellow and black lines, these are the standards internationally. And our bars going up at a consumption by country. I think this tells it all in terms of our consumption. Of course, some of this we can attribute to the sectors that we're engaged in, but still, majority of it is for domestic consumption as measured by the blue bar. Non-revenue water, which I would have mentioned earlier, non-revenue water is what is actually produced. It goes through the pipes, but it doesn't actually get billed, so it gets lost through the distribution system, or it's not billed at the end of the system. So for us in the region, the average is about 45.6% in terms of non-revenue water, and that is significant. Similar to the last slide, what I did was put in the international benchmark. As you can see, it's about 20-something% as an international benchmark, and we exceed that in some of our territories. You could see, I think it's up, Jamaica, Guyana is probably up 60 or so%. It's significant loss in water. Inefficient systems, another issue I would have alluded to, and this is really reflected in the first graph at the top, will show you water productivity in terms of number of employees per 1,000 connections. Of course, the bars will show you that we're above the standard, similar to the other two charts that I would have shown. And then the working ratio graph is really how much revenue is collected for you to cover your expenses compared to your operational costs. And of course, the international benchmark being the yellow line, and our working ratios way above that. And all this would have come from the study from CDB in terms of some of the indicators that were collected. This one is a calculation that we would have done at the bank, and it's very telling that the price that you pay for water in the pipes is really nothing, 0.003 US cents per liter. And if you look at the cost of a bottle of water, which is like this, right? In Barbados, we would pay, I know on the airport you'd pay $4 Barbados, $2 US for this, right? And a liter is 2 of these bottles. So can you imagine the amount of money that we spend on bottled water, which is a multi-million-dollar industry, not only in the region, but worldwide. But we do not pay the price for water that we get through our taps. And this is very telling. And it also reflects on our ability as policymakers, government, to invest in proper water systems, distribution systems, infrastructure that is needed for a sustainable future in all aspects when we think about it. And so the impacts, just very briefly, of poor water management, as we would have mentioned, the senator as well as myself, that a lot of our countries are at this 5.0 water stress index, very highly stressed countries in terms of water. And then for this, I took 2 studies to show that ECLAC is projecting on the GDP scenario that if there is a 1% increase in GDP, we expect the demand for water, residential, that's just residential water usage, to increase by 0.19%. And in that study, they used just about 9 Caribbean countries. So it probably may be higher if you use the full sample of countries, or it may be less. We're not too sure. But it still tells a story that as you grow, there will be an increase in demand for water, and probably my next graph will show you this gap that we're projecting in terms of supply and demand. And for the population scenario, notwithstanding we've discussed some of our countries have declining populations, some have increasing populations. The World Bank is projecting that there will be a 21.8% water deficit on a business as usual case with population growth for the Caribbean as it is. And I think these are two areas that policymakers really need to pay attention to. And this is what I was talking about. This really is the essence of the presentation in terms of the water deficit, a 21% projected water deficit by 2030, which is also the year for our SDGs. And the red bar, the red shaded area is really what the deficit will be, and the blue in the back is what is supplied. The red bar is the demand, and the blue one in the back is really what the supply is going to, expected to be based on projections. And you can see from this that going into 2030, we are going to have critical water issues if we do not address some of the issues that I think on the surface we can address. And even going back to this slide, this is really just looking at the data as it is, as consumption as it is, and not even taking into consideration factors like climate change, natural disasters, and change in rainfall patterns. So you could well imagine that when you add climate change to this and natural disasters, that the deficit between your supply will be much larger. Policy options, like I had mentioned before, what we did was really to show that some of the countries within the region have started to do some reforms. The Cayman Islands, they have a very good, from our analysis, a very good tariff policy, and with that policy comes some standards, and they also included something called an infrastructure leakage index to deal with the non-revenue water that I would have mentioned earlier. So Cayman is one of the islands that we could possibly look at to guide us in terms of tariff reform. Number two being non-revenue water, and the case of Bahamas, this was done via a PPP, and from the last time we did an assessment, they had huge success in that PPP in terms of reducing non-revenue water. The third one being governance, and one of the issues we raised was that of very old legislation and water being spread across a large number of ministries, but nobody is really responsible. And so I think we picked out Trinidad because they have mainly 4 pieces of legislation. There's a separate water authority, separate with a separate legal entity, and of importance is a separate regulatory authority for water. And number 4 I would have mentioned is integrated water resource management. There has been some efforts in the region. I think we can do more at a national and regional level to guide us in terms of water security going forward. So I will end with this slide, and it's from Nigel Clark, who is the Ambassador of Economic Affairs and Deputy Chair of the Economic Growth Council of Jamaica. And it's very insightful. He was having a discussion with the IMF on the growth path for Jamaica, and I think some of us know that Jamaica has made a statement that they want 5% GDP growth by 2020. And so he was speaking to what is needed to achieve that growth. And I've highlighted there, one of the areas he mentioned was agriculture. But of note, he said in the agricultural sector, the 2 key impediments are access to reliable water. And that is very, very, very telling. And so he goes on to say that for us to achieve that level of growth and results that they would like to see, they need to invest in water storage and distribution systems and irrigation. And that's just touching it on the surface for agriculture and not looking at anything else like production and consumption, domestic consumption. With that, I end, and we take any questions that you may have. Bearing in mind, I'm not a water expert, but an economist. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is really scratching the surface, like I said, and we wanted to bring the issues out to have people start thinking and talking about it, most importantly. But I think you need to deal with it, like you said, on the governance level, the policy level, but you also need to deal with it on the consumption end and get people aware of what the issues are and how they can play their part. I will tell you, I went to India in 2014 and I was quite surprised that we stayed at a very nice hotel, but when I stepped in the bathroom, there was a bucket in the bathroom. And so I'm like, what is this bucket for? There's running water, there's a very nice tap, and it's like, you're supposed to use the bucket, it has a cup in it, and that's how they try to get people to conserve water. You use a bucket of water to take a shower. And I mean, we may not have to be so drastic, but these are some very small things that we as consumers can do to try to conserve water and to instill it in our young generation that water is a resource and it's a very, very important resource. Maybe it might even be more important than oil as we go into the future. That's my own perception.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Sandra Messiah. I work for Public Services International, an international trade union organization. And we've been doing quite a bit of work on water as a human right.
Okay.
You mentioned, just in passing, and I'm going to try to take some time to look at the actual study, but you mentioned one of the options referred to public-private partnerships in water, and I think you mentioned Bahamas.
Yes.
Do you have any details that you can readily share with us? And if you do, I'd also like to have a chat with you after, because I'd like to share with you some of the studies that we have done about the really serious effects, detrimental effects to countries, because it ends up adding to the debt when you deal with public-private partnerships in utilities.
So you could share, we have the bank, that was before my time, would have lent some assistance to Bahamas through the PPP unit. So what I can do, we could exchange contacts and let you speak with Brian Sambian, who would have been more integrally involved in the Bahamas case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just for the benefit of those who are here, if you don't mind, I know that this is an option that is being pushed particularly by a number of UN agencies, this public-private partnership, and it sounds ever so wonderful. What it ends up doing is that the governments are strapped with having to borrow the money and to be the guarantors, and when things don't work, the private companies leave and the next generations have to pay that debt. And we've had a couple of examples in the Caribbean where there have been public-private partnerships, and in fact the governments have had to take back over, and Trinidad and Tobago is one classic example where the water system was privatized.
Yeah.
Yes, a few people got some service, but in the long run it was just detrimental and the government had to take it back. And I think that we do need to be a bit more forthright and forthcoming about the actual examples of public-private partnerships. And not only am I talking in the Caribbean, worldwide. I mean, a big case in the UK about it. So I think that perhaps in the discussions about partnerships, perhaps throughout this conference, those concrete examples need to be brought to the fore more, because people are going to hear private-public partnership and think, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It ain't.
The yellow is the rural standard by World Bank calculations. This is what a rural community on average would use, and the black one is for an urban community based on their calculations, and the bars show where we're at using that measurement of liters per capita per day, and that is significant.
And if you look at Grenada, for example, and just look at what the per capita, that's approximately 400. But if you go back to the production, you would see that on average, if you go back to that, then you will see that Grenada, come back, it's just past it. Grenada is producing about
1,181.
So you have a lot more water than is being consumed on average per capita, because you have a small population. So, but if you look at ours, suppose we consume the amount Grenada has per capita for Barbados, it is above what we produce. So you can see, when we talk about water scarcity, you can see how bad the situation is in Barbados compared to Grenada or Guyana at the extreme of the least. Now these are large countries with small populations, but they have vast forests, they have forests, rivers, and so on.
Because of how we perceive water as a social good. And I'm not saying no, it's not a social good, because it forms, like I said at the beginning, it's part of your whole ecosystem. You can't do without it. But we must find a way to deal with this, or else by 2040, as you can see, we will have serious water issues. Probably second except for Guyana, so Suriname, Belize.
It links particularly to how do we pay the price for the investment in the service. And that's the base of all of our arguments. Because people say, where's the money going to come from? And in many cases, and in a number of countries, both developing and developed, we do not have fair taxation systems. So we're not collecting enough taxes, and I'm not talking about the everyday Jane and Jenny in the street. I'm talking about from the multinationals and the large corporations that do everything possible to avoid paying taxes. You made mention of Cayman Islands in terms of tariffs. If Cayman were to really collect the taxes from all the post office box companies that they have in Cayman, they would be able to invest money in the water system, their health system, and their education system. So as you stated earlier, it has to be a holistic approach. You have to look at the economy in its full sense and recognize that a lot of these services that many of us take for granted, which are public services, are there for us all, but everybody must pay their fair share. What some of our governments and authorities have to end up doing, because these multinationals are too big, is that we then focus only on the individual consumer, and then the individual consumer has to take the burden of paying increase over increase, because in many cases those big companies are finding all sorts of ways to avoid paying the taxes that they should.
I don't play devil's advocate, but I don't play Caymanian advocate. Because you mentioned post office, and that has to perhaps do with the protective of the agency. But in the internal business sector, on the other hand, in the context of our industry, we would argue that if we did not have, and you use the word tax avoidance, which is important as opposed to tax evasion, but in the context of those countries like Barbados, and Bahamas, and other countries in the Caribbean, and the differences between us and Cayman, so I could probably use Barbados, which is a low tax jurisdiction. It is because we have created those arrangements that we, in fact, in the case of Barbados, get about 60% of our tax revenue from the international business sector. In fact, if you were to listen to recent debates of the budget, a couple of years ago, I think it was 2012, 13, when the Canadians changed their legislation, in order to not lose those companies, we had to further reduce our taxes. And we, as opposed to losing them, because we ended up probably forfeiting about $200 million in revenue by reducing the rates. But the alternative was the exit of those companies if there were no advantage. So it is a very difficult balancing act that you have, because I agree, we have to ensure that there is availability. I mean, there's no life without water. There's no industry without water. There's no social, So this is the reality. And the question is, how does a government educate all stakeholders really to the importance of playing their respective parts? I mean, one of the things, of course, that the brewery, for example, will have to look at, how do we recycle? How do hotels recycle their water? For example, in gardens and all kinds of things, to ensure that there's not that significant waste. I think it's an issue which we in CARICOM, and certainly in the countries like Barbados, we need to sensitize the public to, because at the end of the day, there are other issues for countries that are not water scarce. There are other issues of pollution and the impact of that. I mean, I mentioned the connection with the sea. Sargassum seaweed, it is felt that is fed by nutrients discharged by manufacturing entities, probably in some of the countries of South America and elsewhere. and the overflow of nutrients, etc. So what happens, perhaps they're even polluting some of the very waters that they will rely on onshore, but they're also creating problems offshore. And I think what we had today was an introduction to what is indeed an important issue, that is not only the issue of protecting our water supply and our sources and good utilization, but linking that with the issue of sustainable and consumption and production, because water is essential to every facet of our lives, really. And I really want to thank you, Ms. Kadu Jeffrey. I think it was an excellent presentation, and to thank those who thought it necessary. I believe we had some important questions, and I look forward to your continued work in this area. Thank you very much.